Once upon a time, in a small town nestled between rolling hills, lived an unassuming man named Thomas. He wasn't wealthy by the standards of the world, but his heart overflowed with kindness, and his spirit radiated an unwavering faith. Thomas wasn't known for fancy possessions or a lavish lifestyle. Instead, he was celebrated for something far more precious: his character and faith that echoed through generations. "Grandpa, why don't we have all the cool stuff other kids have?" asked young Emily, looking around their simple, yet welcoming home. "Well, my dear, material things come and go. What's truly important is what we carry within our hearts," Thomas replied, a gentle smile on his face. "Like what, Grandpa?" Emily inquired with curiosity, settling on a chair beside him. Thomas chuckled softly, "Like kindness, my dear. Remember when we helped Mrs. Thompson with her groceries last week? It wasn't about having the latest toys, but the joy of lending a hand. He wasn't always this way. Growing up, Thomas faced hardships that could have embittered anyone. But adversity had a different effect on him. It molded his character and shaped his values." "Pa, why do you always help Mr. Jenkins even when he's not so nice?" Thomas's son, David, asked curiously. "Because kindness costs nothing, David. Everyone deserves a chance to feel cared for," Thomas replied, patting his son's shoulder. "Even when it's hard?" David questioned, his brows furrowed in thought. "Especially then, son," Thomas said, looking at David with a warmth that spoke volumes. "It's not about what we receive in return, but about being the kind of person who chooses compassion." He was a father who spent time teaching his children life's simple yet profound lessons. He wasn't about fancy gifts or grand gestures. He was about being present, listening, and imparting wisdom in the most ordinary moments. "Grandpa, why are you always smiling?" inquired little Jacob, watching Thomas tend to their garden. "Because, Jacob, I have faith that even in difficult times, there's always something to be grateful for," Thomas answered, his eyes twinkling with joy. "Do you ever feel sad, Grandpa?" Jacob asked, tilting his head inquisitively. "Of course, my boy. Sadness is a part of life, but I choose to focus on the good. That's what keeps me smiling," Thomas explained, offering Jacob a reassuring smile. As his children grew and had children of their own, Thomas's legacy began to reveal itself. His grandchildren cherished moments spent with their grandfather, not for the things he gave, but for the values he instilled. They listened intently to his stories of overcoming adversity through faith, stories of standing strong in integrity, and stories of a life built on principles that held true in the darkest of times. One of their favorite was the story about the power of unwavering belief and perseverance. One sunny afternoon, Thomas gathered his grandchildren in the cozy living room. Jacob, Emily, and little Sarah sat cross-legged around their grandfather, their eyes filled with curiosity. "Grandpa, tell us a story," requested Jacob eagerly. Thomas smiled warmly, nodding in agreement. "All right, let me tell you a story about perseverance, faith, and healing." He opened an old, worn Bible, flipping through its pages until he reached the passage in Luke 5 verses 17 to 26. "Long ago, in a crowded town much like ours, there was a man who was paralyzed and confined to his bed," Thomas began, his voice gentle yet filled with conviction. The children leaned in closer, their young hearts captivated by their grandfather's storytelling. "This man heard about Jesus and his healing powers," continued Thomas. "People talked about Jesus' ability to heal the sick, and the man felt a glimmer of hope." "Did the man go to Jesus, Grandpa?" asked Emily, her eyes wide with anticipation. "He did," Emily, nodded Thomas. "But when he arrived at the house where Jesus was, it was packed with people. There was no room for him to get inside." "That's so sad," remarked Sarah, frowning. "Yes, but the man didn't give up," said Thomas. "He showed incredible perseverance and faith. So, he and his friends climbed onto the roof, made a hole, and lowered the paralyzed man down to Jesus." "Were they not scared, Grandpa?" Jacob inquired, his imagination running wild. "Perhaps they were, Jacob, but their faith in Jesus was stronger," replied Thomas. "And when Jesus saw their faith, something amazing happened." "What happened?" the children asked in unison. "Jesus looked at the paralyzed man and said, 'Friend, your sins are forgiven,'" recounted Thomas. "Then, to show that he had the authority to heal, Jesus said, 'Get up, take your mat, and go home.'" "And did the man get up, Grandpa?" Sarah asked, her eyes sparkling with wonder. "He did, Sarah," Thomas said, a twinkle in his eyes mirroring the excitement in his grandchildren's. The paralyzed man immediately stood up, picked up his mat, and walked home, healed by the power of his faith and Jesus' love. The children gasped in amazement, their hearts filled with the hope and wonder of the miraculous story. "Wow, that's incredible, Grandpa," exclaimed Emily. "It shows that faith and perseverance can move mountains," added Jacob, his voice filled with newfound understanding. Thomas nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Yes, my dear ones, it's a reminder that even in our hardest times, holding on to faith and never giving up can lead to extraordinary miracles." The story of faith and healing lingered in the air, leaving an imprint on the hearts of Thomas's grandchildren, a reminder of the power of unwavering belief and perseverance. Before Thomas's passing, he had a heartfelt conversation with his grandchildren. "I love you all dearly," Thomas said, his voice filled with tenderness. "Remember, life is full of challenges, but let your character and faith guide you. Carry the torch of kindness and pass it on." At his funeral, tears mingled with smiles as family and friends shared memories of a man whose influence stretched far beyond his years. They remembered a man whose kindness changed lives, whose faith moved mountains, and whose character left an indelible mark on their souls. Thomas's children and grandchildren carried his legacy forward. They lived by the principles he taught, passed down stories of his life, and carried the torch of character and faith that illuminated their paths. And so, generations to come would remember Thomas, not for what he owned, but for the enduring legacy he left. A legacy of character and faith that shaped their lives and inspired them to be better, to love deeper, and to believe in something greater than themselves.